using podcasts to drive demand generation for B2B tech companies. But I've literally just come off this chat with Claude AI about various things and a game that I worked on. This one, Azrael's Tear, published in 1996, and if you've never heard of it, you can be forgiven. It came out about a month before Tomb Raider, delightfully, Claude quoted a comment from an article on a blog that I had written. It said, this is, you need to know this. Anyway, it's always nice when AI quotes you at yourself. So that's why I'm in a good mood. I want to talk a little bit about actual lived experience of doing webinars, I want to start with just mentioning that I host two webinars, Behind the Data for Clover DX and From the Source for Black Dot, both clients of ours. Very, very geeky and technical and with a very narrow audience, which is an interesting use case for webinars in B2B marketing. It's actually part of the answer of, we've got a really narrow group that we're trying to target. How do we engage with them and so on. Anyway, we've also at Articulate helped quite large companies, one a PLC and one a very large software business, set up podcasts, and we've coached the presenters, or we've helped them set up the technicalities and so on. So we've got a fair amount of experience with this, and I've got quite a lot of direct experience. Also, I just set up a podcast like 10 years ago for Microsoft, so I could slightly claim to be a small pioneer in a little way with this stuff. So most people, when they think about podcasts, think about it as sort of super top of funnel, awareness level and sort of stuff, maybe a little bit of PR. For Clover, it has a use case as well in communicating to their customer base. And the first bunch of episodes were largely talking to Clover DX users. Fine, and they have audiences, but is there a revenue line attached to them? And what I want to try and do in talking today at this webinar is actually how you use podcasts for demand generation, how they actually turn into business. And I want to start with some data about people who listen to podcasts. And this is coming from Edison and about US audiences and various other sort of sources, but it's basically extrapolatable to other countries in the UK as well. Based on a large sampling of podcast listeners who listen to regularly podcasts, more than half are decision makers in their business. Massively over-indexed for business owners, about 18% of business owners, and podcasts are significantly more trusted by listeners than social media. So what you've got there is a high influence, high power audience and a high trust communication channel. Fantastic, right? Isn't this what we're dreaming of as marketers? And incidentally, this association with business owners is a really interesting finding for any kind of communications or media. Years and years and years ago, when IBM launched the IBM PC, and Microsoft, which was quite a small company back then, not tiny but smallish, branched out from doing business software and operating systems to make Microsoft Flight Simulator, which at the time was the sort of benchmark of IBM PC compatibility. And the reason they did it was they did some research that found that PC owners were very highly correlated with business decision makers, and they made a game to get the Microsoft name in front of business owners, not only but also. Anyway, so that's two computer games references in one webinar. I'm on fire today. I think that one of the reasons why podcasts and webinars, which I talked about last week, are really, really important today is that we live in a world where AI content is very easy to create. You hit a button, you get 2,000 words. Hit a button, you get Claude quoting something you wrote 5 years ago back at you. Podcasts, however, work very well for niche audiences, and they manifest human experience and expertise in a way that just getting an AI written or an AI edited blog post can't. It's a genuine voice that stands out, and the more niche the audience in many ways, the more that authenticity is valuable. I also want to calibrate your expectations of what success looks like, because people have this perception of podcasts. I mean, in my case, I listen to a lot in my life, This American Life, or In Our Time, and these sorts of very highly polished radio productions, and you think that's a podcast. Well, it doesn't have to be that. The expectation of production values doesn't have to be up there. And the second thing is successful B2B podcasts is not Joe Rogan. It's not The Rest is Politics. It's not The Diary of a CEO. These not these mega popular podcasts. On average, 27 downloads a week, right? And if you're doing 400 plus downloads in a week, which is, you have to have quite a big audience, or it's quite hard to get to that, you're in the top 10% of podcasts. So don't set your expectation of high production values and huge audiences. That's not the mission that you're trying to achieve with B2B podcasts for marketing. No. Let's reframe that a little bit. If you were getting 20 listens a week, and by the way, most people who listen to podcasts tend to listen to the whole episode, you're having a one-to-one kind of conversation which is authentic and real. It might be an interview-based podcasting, but you're having a direct relationship with somebody who's giving you their time and attention, and a substantial amount of it. If your sales team or a salesperson was booking you for 20 let's have a coffee meetings that they seem to want to get all the time, or let's have a quick chat a week, you'd be kind of happy, right? If every salesperson was doing that, that might be a good. And yet a podcast can do that for you at scale. If you were doing, top 10% podcast, and you were doing 400 downloads a week, really substantial audience for your thing, maybe you've got, long established and popular. It's like speaking to a conference room full of people. Now, if somebody invited you to do a TEDx talk in Basingstoke or something, and you rocked up and there were 200, 300 people in the room, you'd be really proud and really excited, right? Well, what if you could do that every week with your very successful and established podcast? It's a very different thing when you start thinking about it like that, and the value of that direct engagement. Okay, and why that I think is important for in the context of marketing and sales rather than just fame and reputation is the sale is the sample, right? So if you are hearing a podcast that is talking intelligently about open source intelligence investigations with, people who are like frontline practitioners of that, and you are one of those people, you're going to think this company, Black Dot, really is embedded in my world. They really understand what I'm doing. They really have some deep technical understanding. They're talking to people like me. It's relevant and useful and interesting. That is a great place to be starting a marketing and sales conversation from, right? So it's the first step in a journey that actually each step of the marketing and sales funnel should look like something that represents the end engagement. The other reason I think podcasts and brackets and webinars are really, really valuable is this famous Seymour Cray comment. Back in the day, there was this big debate about whether you should build supercomputers with a few really highly powerful core processors, or whether you should build them with sort of massive parallel processing. Thinking machines versus Cray, I suppose, was the model then, and today I think that the answer has been sort of rather resolved because we have 1,000 chickens. But with podcasts, you might be having 20, 30, 40 conversations or listens a week. You might be doing 50 or 100 if you're doing well and you've been around for a while and you've built your audience. But people are listening for about 30 minutes, right? People are paying a lot of attention. Your name is coming up a lot. You're in their mind. Whereas most other measurable marketing engagements are like a sort of drive-by look at a page. And we did a very well. We did. I wouldn't quite dignify it with an analysis, but I looked at the stats on a couple of client websites and the average length of a page visit. And that includes some bots. I mean, we filter quite a lot, but it includes some sort of very fast views. Is about 100 seconds. So on average, page gets about a minute and a bit. Whereas for a podcast, most of the time people listen to all of it. You're getting 30 minutes of engagement. So it's deep and it's trusted and it's representative of your business and it's sort of engaging with people and so it's all kinds of good things. I've got a much better graph than that as I added this animation this morning. The other thing that's happened in the last even 6 months, and certainly last 12 months, is that AI has made podcasting and webinars massively easier, right? I mean, I'm using Riverside FM here to record this. It has text to video editing, so you just delete a thing and it just goes right. Before, I mean, I remember when I was doing the Microsoft podcast, I had to send them away to a friend of mine who did the editing like in a studio and cut things and tidied and did sound normalization and stuff, sent me the file back, and I had to pay him to do that. It took a week. Just click a button, it does it for you. Now AI is fantastic. It does the transcription. It can take the video content that you produce and turn it into social media clips. It can extract it. Just this whole production pipeline has dramatically improved and accelerated thanks to AI, without in any way reducing the human content or the creativity of the person speaking, right? All of this is just about process. It's not about content. And that's very different from writing blog posts or white papers with AI, where the AI is doing quite a lot of the work for you, quite a lot of the intellection. Okay. So I'm going to share 5 tips, as promised, strategies for using podcasts in for commercial marketing sales results. The first one is make sure that when you are doing podcasts, you're doing video as well, and start with video podcasting. Now, this is kind of hard for people to process because podcasting is considered an audio only medium, but Edison's 2026 report says that 82% of weekly podcast consumers now actively watch videos, and that's up from 78% who are only audio. So that sounds a bit janky to me. It's up a lot. And what that means, sorry, I'm reading the stats here, misreading them. In 2023, 89% were audio only and 78% now. So people are shifting to video consumption, YouTube being the top channel. So when you're making a podcast, if you're interviewing people, keep the cameras on, export to YouTube, make sure that the YouTube channel has sort of the meta descriptions around it and it can transcribe. So AI, particularly Google AI, which is important for SEO, is using YouTube content a lot for sourcing. And now, because we've all got these wonderful cameras and microphones built into our computers, we don't need high-end sort of HD cameras. I remember years ago doing video like case studies for Microsoft and other people and needing like really quite high-end film kit. I'm not sure any of that's necessary, and I know that podcast purists will say you need to have a boom mic and muffle and blah 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 blah, but probably. But I think that's a sort of episode 20 onwards type of requirement, not something you need on day one. And you can do high quality video podcasts and interviews using Riverside, where it's recording the full HD at both ends of the conversation. So the video conference bit that you're seeing when you're actually doing the podcast, it can be kind of bandwidth constrained and quite low quality and lossy and compressed, and you still get full HD video in the final output because it gets uploaded into the cloud locally. That kind of thing is amazing. I mean, and I've done podcast interviews where the internet's almost dropped out at moments during the recording, and it's got quite patchy and pixelated. But the end result has been fine because the local recording carried on as normal, and my guests would just carry on talking, and I'd wait for the internet to come back and then ask my next question, and it was fine. So high quality, again, as long as your production values expectation isn't Steven Spielberg, high quality video is not an obstacle anymore. Strategy number 2. Interview people who have their own network and who are often very excited and willing to be interviewed, and will take the content that you provide and the transcripts and the social media clips and the clippings and so on, and promote it. So you can make that really effortless. You can give them a guest kit with clips and quote cards and suggested post copies and transcript and video and all this stuff. Say, look, would love you to get this out on your network, and you can then start cross-referencing and engaging with them. That means you might be tapping into, for example, a guest might have 5,000 or 10,000 followers on LinkedIn, and suddenly your reach and your credibility is amplified through their LinkedIn channel and their audience, and they're endorsing you, and by implication. And that trust compounds, right? Cumulus Signal Hill in 2026 reported that podcast hosts are twice as influential as social media creators. So there's a halo effect for the host and the company behind it from this. And we're finding now that because once you get established with a podcast and you've done a reasonable number of episodes, you can start reaching out to quite important and interesting people, professors and published authors and experts and academics and things. It's typically where we're going, but and they're keen to come on the show because they want to reach the same people you're trying to reach. So you can amplify your content and your audience and your reputation through them. The other strategy number 3, is invite people who might be potential customers. And why not invite your dream prospects to become guests on your podcast? They might not be ready to buy, but they might be very willing to come on a podcast and talk about how clever they are. And it's an easier ask because it's slightly less commercially loaded than, can we have a sales meeting, or can you write us a case study, or can whatever. And you can then use that as a friendly, trusted, sale is the sample, but in a different way, a relationship builder with guests. And I think that there's a model where this is the only thing people are doing on podcasts. And there's a model where it's interwoven with other kinds of guests for credibility. And I think that would be, for me, my preference. Build an authoritative podcast because the people you have on it are interesting to your audience, and then invite your top prospects into that environment, into that thing. So I think ethics are quite important. Bait and switch as a way of using a podcast as a sales pitch is not a nice idea. And I did quite a lot of podcast guesting a couple of years ago, mainly for link building PR purposes. So I was on about 30 podcasts, probably a bit more actually. And I would say of those 30 that I was guesting on, 5 were bait and switch. I didn't like it very much. A couple of them asked me to pay to appear, which also was sort of interesting. My favorite podcast, I was on a Lego podcast, like an official Lego history podcast about a game I designed, I worked on. I won't claim to have designed all of it, called Lego Loco. And that was a great fun. You can look that up as well. Okay, so strategy number 4, because you have got authoritative, human, expert, interesting content captured in a podcast, you can then repurpose it. And HubSpot has Content Remix. There are other tools that do this. You can do this sort of in a manual or semi-automated way. But out of a single podcast, you should get a blog post, you should get a newsletter, you should get a whole bunch of social media, you get video clips, you get YouTube, you get content for your website, you get snippets and quotes that you can send to, give to salespeople to be able to go, oh yeah, well, we did a podcast about that question you're asking and you might be interested in it. Very nice sort of way of enriching a sales conversation. And it can be AI assisted and it can be manually written. But if you do that, you're producing this huge amount of content from one 40 minute interview plus the hour or so prep and a sort of hour or so production effort. We are also seeing podcast interviews alongside case study interviews and subject matter expert interviews that we do internally, forming a library, a context library for AI tools that you can then interrogate and find quotes and samples and insights that are very specific to the companies that we're creating these podcasts for. And we've done this for Clover, and we're building this sort of tooling out for ourselves. This is podcast webinar 115, so all of that. So correction, webinar 114. All that stuff is going into our AI superbrain. Challenging bit with this is that a lot of the podcasting goes unmeasured. You get listens as a data point. You get some metrics out of the content that you create. If you track it, so if you use HubSpot Campaigns tool, you can start to tag all the podcast assets that you create and go, okay, our podcast created assets that created this lead gen or this traffic awareness. Most companies don't do that. So most companies will start a podcast, do 3 or 4 episodes, find it's relatively hard work because they're not doing it in an efficient way, and then goes, there's no ROI. A company called Refine Labs did some analysis across 620 customers and $20 odd million of revenue, and couldn't easily, with the metrics, with the companies that they were analyzing this for, find any attribution of revenue. But when they talked to the customers, they found that customers credited podcasts with 53% of their journeys. So actually asking customers, how did you hear about us? Oh, have you listened to our podcast? Would you like to? That's really, really important. But I think that HubSpot's campaigns tool is another way of getting at this in part. So measure. Most companies probably don't have an ROI problem with their podcasts. They have a measurement problem. So strategy 5, put the podcast in the CRM, use it as a sales asset, right? And you can put a few custom fields into a CRM, and you can put some questions into call scripts or playbooks for sales reps. How did you hear about us, right? And have podcasts be one of the options. You could give some little snippets like frequently asked questions, or if you have battle cards for the sales team where you might have sort of counter objection messaging or question responses. You go, okay, oh yeah, our CTO did a podcast about that. Would you like me to send it to you? Better than a PDF in most cases, I would say, because it's out loud, it's talking to somebody, typically not a spokesperson for the company. Once you start measuring this kind of thing and deploying your podcast assets into the sales cycle, the plumbing allows you to do much better reporting and analysis, and so I would recommend it. Right, we're cracking on very nicely. A couple of minutes left to go. I've got one more slide and then just my peroration. So go video first, book guests who bring their audience, book guests who might become customers, repurpose the podcasts efficiently and effectively, build it into your sales system. That's how you turn podcasts into pipeline. And I would therefore recommend that you stop counting only downloads as the measure of success and start measuring engagement, and make podcasts part of your long-term drive, and we call it a drive engagement, part of your long-term marketing funnel engine. Articulate Marketing can help. We've done lots of clever things with HubSpot and websites and podcasts and content. Couple of offers for you. If you write down your 10 dream guests, send me an email. I'll tell you which 3 I would invite. Be interesting to see what you come up with. If you would like to discuss podcasts and webinars with me, book up a marketing review. This link has my calendar and articulatemarketing.marketing/marketing-review. And the next webinar, next Wednesday, I think, is my colleague Joanna, who always does really fascinating, thought-provoking webinars. And she's also an amazing chef. She made a fermented thing that she claims tastes like bubble gum with science in it. So she's a genius at that stuff. She's going to be talking about what the greatest chefs can teach us about building successful webinars. For Articulate, Joanna runs the website team, so she's right there in the heart of that. Go to articulatemarketing/webinars and you'll see all the different pre and post webinars up there. You can sign up for that and others. And that is the end of today's webinar. Crikey. Freudian slap there. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you for watching. Have a wonderful day.